Here's a good question from Bruce Vader. Most sites that espouse the merits of expat living fail to mention the worst features of a particular locale. Can we, as prospective expats, be privy to the good and the bad of life in another country? Things such as crime rates, political corruption, extortion, police force, year-round weather, humidity, insects, etc., are just some of the drawbacks that should be discussed, don't you think? I 100% agree. There are drawbacks in just about all countries, that have been discussed on Retire Worldwide. And in fact, there are drawbacks to living anywhere in the world. And those drawbacks, are different, but they don't go away when you move somewhere. There are all kinds of drawbacks to living, and I don't have time in this space to go over every country in the world, but you know, probably one of the drawbacks that most people overlook is just adjusting to a foreign culture and not having people who speak English or people who understand like to do the same kinds of things that you do, and missing your family and friends. I think is a drawback that is often overlooked. In fact, in one of our reports that is available to research members, it's the top 10 things that you will miss if you retire overseas. And in that report, we go over what I think are the top 10 things that you will miss, and that relates to drawbacks that do occur when you think about moving overseas. So some of these though that are mentioned here in this question, crime rates, political corruption, extortion. You know, I think some of those get overplayed by people who haven't lived overseas. Unless you were doing big business, you're probably not going to be a victim of extortion or political corruption. Certainly, there are areas of where you're going to get hassled by the police, where they try to get you to pay your ticket, to them in cash rather than to the actual government agency that oversees those payments. Um, but it's usually a relatively small price to pay compared to what the same ticket might cost you back home. But that's besides the point. The point is that there are drawbacks, and finding out what those are for you usually requires you to pay a visit and see for yourself. Who are we to tell you what a drawback is for you and isn't for somebody else? For example, the climate. I find tropical climate at sea level too hot. Um, you know, just too hot. I think but there's lots of other people who are coming down from warmer climes that don't have any problems with those temperatures. Insects. Throughout the tropics, I've never really had a big problem with insects. The insects are different, obviously, but I've had worse problems with mosquitoes up in Canada in the summertime than anywhere in the world I've ever been. Whether it be jungle, whether it be beach. So chances are insects aren't going to be any worse than wherever you are. Um, Crime rates really vary from urban to rural. But I do think crime is something that people need to be aware of, and does exist. One thing I wanted to point out about crime was that Latin America, which is covered extensively on our website, Mexico on down to Argentina, does have much higher crime rates than parts of Asia, where crime is punished much more severely. And so you talk to people who live in Bali or in Thailand, and they're just really never really afraid of any sort of real violent crime, or even break-ins. to the same extent that you would be, for example, in Mexico or in Costa Rica. So, good point, Bruce. I think our hosts, who are people who have already retired overseas, and our research members gain access to those contacts. Those would be people where you could, if you were interested in a particular place, you could ask them flat out, what are the drawbacks of living where you live? And I'm sure they'll come up with a few. And I think then again, going down and making a personal visit, hopefully you can see and get to know what it is that